Education reform hotly debated by China's top political advisors. What have been the proposals put forward and what needs to be done now? And in the wake of global grief after world-famous physicist Stephen Hawking passed away, what will be his greatest legacy? Welcome to The Point. I'm Cheng Lei, sitting in for Liu Xin. China's top political advisory body closed this year's meeting Thursday. Among the proposals discussed, continued education reforms, promoting education equality, and a question of homework burden for kids. Let's find out where China's heading on education reforms. Joining me in the discussion from Hong Kong is Carol Cheung, Chairwoman of the Elsie Tu Education Fund, and here in the studio, Einar Tangen, a current affairs commentator. Welcome to the show. Let me start by asking you, Tangen. Chinese Premier Li Keqiang said in his work report that we need to ensure people get equal opportunity to change their lives through education. But when I was growing up, poorer families' kids may have had a higher chance of success. But what about now, when education resources are clearly slanted towards big cities?
Well, it's very difficult. I mean, everyone is competing for these things. You know, they included this idea that you would go to a local school and all of a sudden the real estate at the best school districts went up dramatically and things like that. I mean, money is always going to be a factor in education, but I mean, the Chinese government has three principles. They're trying to encourage curiosity, this idea of wanting to learn, critical thinking, how you go about it. This is very different from, you know, a classroom where 70 children are just listening to a lecture for an hour. And then the last part is this inclusion, and that's what we're talking about here, this idea of how do you design a system so that that everybody has an equal opportunity to get ahead. This is a socialist society, so they're sticking to their principles on this one.
Carol, some political advisors believe it's hard for the rural areas and the western regions to bring in good teachers and other education resources. It's also harder for children of those areas to realize their dreams. So what needs to change, and what's your fund doing?
Well, difficulties in bringing good teachers and education resources are unfortunately very common in rural areas in China. Apart from improving infrastructure in these areas, specialized allowance or reward system should be set up to attract them to commit to develop their teaching career path there. However, to tackle this problem realistically or longer term, we have to provide trainings to these local teachers in rural areas. For example, we can bring some of the leading teachers to cities for systematic trainings periodically, or we can make use of technology to provide remote training programs. We can also encourage more visiting teachers program to bring in experienced teachers to help on short-term basis.
Yes, I'm hearing a lot about the remote learning. Einar, you know, this nearby enrollment policy is very controversial in the big cities. It's supposed to ensure education fairness, but now many families are spending the savings to buy houses near good schools. Does that happen in other countries too, and is there any way to solve this problem?
Well, absolutely. I mean, in the United States, you know, there's absolute war mayhem that goes on if there's a good public school and you start, you know, the alternative is a private school and the amount of money, people will automatically go there. Even Chinese, when they go to the United States, one of the first things they look up is the quality of the local public schools and whether or not it'll be suitable for their children. As I said, you never get money out of the equation. The question is, how does the government design the school system so that people have equal opportunity? I mean, this distance learning, I think, is probably the best way of going about this because you don't need to have people physically there. It takes a lot of burden off the local teachers who can be trained, as our other guest said, to work with this system without having to necessarily have all of the detailed knowledge.
Carol, let's talk about homework, because data shows Chinese students spend around 2.8 hours a day on their homework, probably more in high school. I mean, I've got two kids, and they certainly do a lot of homework. Many parents have to spend hours sitting with the children. I do that too. Is it the same in other countries, regions? I know that tiger mums are very common in Hong Kong as well. And what about in private schools or good public schools?
Well, this situation is the same in some countries, in particular in Asia, with Hong Kong definitely as one of them. The 2 hours homework time is roughly the average here in Hong Kong. For some parents, they find it manageable, but for others, I would say the majority, they find it such a burdensome. So it really varies. But I do think we need to liberate students from their parents and their parents from heavy burden. of this homework. As we all know, Chinese students have an overwhelming study burden during primary and secondary education, but lack self-discipline in the free environment of higher education. This phenomenon leads to a decline in the quality of the talent pool. So therefore, we need to design a more balanced study plan for each level of study and scientifically guide students to participate in after-school training and make after-school training a complement instead of a burden to students' quality education.
Einar, I know
and we have to engage government, school and after-school training providers to solve the problem together.
Okay, so after-school training is one solution. Einar, are you in favor of reducing kids' homework? I know that your kids are grown up now, but what was the situation when they were at school?
Well, it was basically the same. I mean, but you have to remember, what is homework about? It's really about reinforcing the lessons of the day and preparing the children for the next day, but then you go away for a 3-month vacation in the summertime and you basically forget about 90%. I taught school. I understand the difficulties are in there, but loading on homework and making kids memorize things, yes, it's good for the basics, but it doesn't necessarily encourage curiosity nor critical thinking. It really has to happen in the actual classroom, and the teachers have to be taught how to engage the students, have them start thinking of how to actually do things with their knowledge, not just simply memorize and then spew it back at a test.
Yes, they need to enjoy the learning. Carol, what about coming back to this idea of education equality? You know, there's this idea that more homework shifts responsibility onto families. And for the poorer families, you know, you've got migrant workers with the grandparents looking after the kids, then really they can't afford the time or the tutors to help kids finish the homework.
Yeah, I think we do see the difficulties for a lot of parents because they find there's a lot of homework for them. So that's why we do have some after-school training provided from schools, which can help some of the parents to solve the problem. However, we have to be very careful for some of the schools who provide this after-school training. This cannot be an extra burden to students. These activities or after-school training should adopt more fun learning approach with more varieties for students and parents to choose from.
So, Einar, what are your ideas on promoting education equality, given the fact that, you know, these after-school extracurricular classes will cost more money?
Well, no, the schools should be providing full day. One of the issues is that, you know, what do you do with your children? They go to school at different hours than you go to work, and then they come back before you're actually through. I think matching the work days to and the activities days for these children is very important. I mean, one of the issues is that Chinese children are getting a little bit bigger, a little bit fatter. They need to have more time out on the playground doing physical activities, and then you have to balance that with things. The best solution is, you know, what I had in my private school in England, which was you did your homework before you left school. There's no reason that you can't stay there, finish up what is necessary. This relieves the burden at home, ensures that everybody has the same opportunity. And since you're there, you can either learn from your fellow students if you have questions, or talk to somebody, a tutor. I think that's the common sense way of doing it. It's a lot better for everybody.
But given the extent of parental anxiety in Asia, and I'm talking to you, Carol, because in Hong Kong I know it can be very severe, you know, is that possible? Is it possible for kids to finish their homework and then go home and actually enjoy some outdoor time?
Well, for public school, it's actually quite impossible, unfortunately. So a lot of them, their parents, or they have to find private tutors to help. But for international school, a lot of the kids, they don't really have much homework to do. Then they can enjoy their time after school.
Let's talk about global ideas about good education. China's basic education, which I enjoyed up to the age of 10, then I went to Australia, has actually been increasingly welcomed by other countries. Some British schools even adopting Shanghai maths textbooks for elementary education. What implications does this have for China's education reforms? Einar, you go first.
Well, quite frankly, it's this balance. This idea that you don't have to memorize anything is foolish. Of course, you need to know the basics. And in many schools, they've gone too far the other way. They just say, oh, we'll try to nurture the children. But yeah, a lot of it is discipline, but you have to balance it. And even in public schools, because that is part of the government, I disagree with my colleague. I think that this is something that the government needs to do to make sure that it is being inclusive. You cannot expect somebody who's working till 9, 10 o'clock at night to come home and go through the homework with their children, especially if they don't know the subjects, nor should they be forced to pay more for it because they can't. So doing it at school is the logical thing.
Carol, do you think there is a happy, ideal median between, say, the Finnish style of education, so much outdoor play, even when it's freezing, and the Chinese disciplined, rote learning kind of education at the basic level?
I would say there's no one solution for all parents or students. It really depends on the kids' personalities, capabilities, and background. So choosing the right school and education system for the kid is actually a key for parents.
I agree with that.
I've actually been going through this with one of my friends who's looking at putting her son into a private school in Australia. And the thing she's looking at is ranking. She doesn't even care about whether that school will fit her son's personality. And maybe that's something to think about. Your thoughts, Einar?
Oh, no, that's very true. I get barraged with questions about schools in England and in the United States, but it's only based on the U.S. News and U.S. News and report, their list of the top things. I keep telling them, look, there are small, medium-sized, and large universities. You really have to pick the university that is going to be a good environment for your son or your daughter. I mean, this idea that one size fits all, especially in education, I completely agree with my colleague. This is the wrong way of approaching it. Children learn differently, and you as a parent, your primary responsibility is to understand your child and find the right situation for them.
Carol, any parting words for our parents out there watching the show?
I totally agree that parent education is a key to the whole education system. We do see a lot of difficulties for students to manage their homework, not just the pressure from the school, but it's also from their parents.
Thank you so much to both of our guests, Carol Cheung, Chairwoman of the Elsie Tu Education Fund, joining us from Hong Kong, and here in the studio in Beijing, current affairs commentator Einar Tangen. It's been a great discussion. You're watching The Point. I'm Cheng Lei, subbing for Liu Xin. On Tuesday, world-renowned physicist Stephen Hawking passed away at the age of 76 in Britain. His work ranged from the origins of the universe through time travel to black holes. Hawking spent most of his life bound to a wheelchair as he suffered from the wasting motor neuron disease he developed at the age of 21. Hawking was given only a few years to live, and later he was largely unable to speak except through a voice synthesizer. So what is his legacy? Joining me from the University of Warwick in the UK is quantum physicist Dr. Gavin Morley, and here in Beijing I'm joined by Zhang Fan, Associate Professor of Astronomy at Beijing Normal University. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. Let me ask you, Mr. Zhang, Hawking shot to fame after the publication of A Brief History of Time. It was a Sunday Times bestseller for 4 years, sold more than 10 million copies worldwide, although it also was aware that it was also dubbed the most popular book never read. Why was such a complex book so popular?
Well, so first of all, Hawking is very well-established scientist, so he is respected as an expert. And then he overcame such adversity in life that he's really respected as a person. So people are willing to sit down and read his books to start with. And then it turns out Hawking is actually a really good storyteller. So this is actually partially the credit of his publisher,
the editor.
The editor, persuading him to avoid using any formula, telling him that every time you use a formula, you're going to lose half the readership. He still used one, so he could have doubled the sales. But it turns out that he's able to present the complicated ideas through a very intuitive manner, which is not actually that simple, because intuition in fundamental physics is not necessarily the same thing in daily life. So that's a highly risky business. You really need to understand what you're talking about to be able to avoid any mistakes and misleading people. And he's obviously very competent in that. And also has and on top of high IQ, he also has very high EQ. He understands how people is receiving the information. He's not just speaking from a presenter's point of view. He's also been able to transform into a reader's mind and figure out what's best to do. So.
Dr. Morley, Professor Hawking worked extensively on marrying the two cornerstones of modern physics, Einstein's general theory of relativity and quantum theory. And Hawking proposed that, as a result of that research, black holes should actually give off light. So could you explain that for us, non-boffins?
Yes, I'll give it a go. So as you say, quantum physics and the general theory of relativity are our two best theories in physics. And the general theory of relativity explains how gravity works and is important for black holes, because black holes are so enormous and so massive that their gravity pulls absolutely everything in, even pulls in the light that's unable to escape from these black holes. And so, because of this, it was thought that black holes were very black, and hence their name. But then Hawking managed to cleverly introduce some quantum physics to this whole explanation. And as a result, it becomes the case that black holes give off a little bit of light, a little bit of radiation. And that's called Hawking radiation. It comes from the fact that quantum physics tells us that an empty vacuum of space actually has tiny particles that are created in pairs all the time, and then immediately the pairs come back together and destroy each other. And next to the edge of a black hole, it's possible that one of these pairs, one of the particles in the pair can get sucked into the black hole, and then the one that doesn't get sucked in is responsible for this light, this radiation, this Hawking radiation that can be then emitted from a black hole. And this hasn't been experimentally verified so far. Unfortunately, it's a very small amount of light. But perhaps if somebody had been able to detect this Hawking radiation, then Hawking would have got a Nobel Prize in physics, which he never did otherwise.
Thank you so much for that eloquent explanation of a very abstract concept. Let's talk more about Hawking, the celebrity. We know he's flown in a hot air balloon. We know he was a TV star, appearing as himself in hit shows like The Simpsons and Big Bang Theory. Many would say he was the exact opposite of what you might expect from a seriously disabled person. Is that a fair comment, Mr. Zhang?
Well, I don't think that's a fair assessment at all. I don't think for a seriously disabled person, being miserable, it should be the norm. I think Hawking's outlook on life and his attitude should be the norm instead of the exception. Obviously, he has limitations on his physical abilities. However, his mental abilities, mental agility is really beyond most people, and he can reach places in his mind that other people could never reach. So that's really not a disability as a whole person point of view. And in fact, I think during his early life, Hawking tried to distance himself from his disease. He didn't talk about it that much. But later on, he realized that by talking about it, he can help others. That's when he started talking about it. But otherwise, he really did not want to emphasize that.
Dr. Morley, getting back to his work, especially work with mathematician Sir Roger Penrose, Hawking showed that Einstein's general theory of relativity implies space and time would have a beginning in the Big Bang and end in black holes. Just how much of a breakthrough was that, and what does it mean for mankind in the future?
Yeah, this was really a huge breakthrough, particularly at the time. Then these ideas of the Big Bang and ideas of big holes, of black holes, sorry, were not accepted at all, and only have started to become common and popular and well known now, thanks to people like Hawking and Penrose. And they're really such startlingly deep and exciting ideas, talking about not just the beginning of space, but the beginning of time, just to try and think about what that means is exciting and inspiring for scientists and for the general public. And black holes as well are such an exotic object to be existing in our universe, something that's really hidden from scientists, and something where the laws of physics break down in the middle of a black hole. It's some shocking, exciting ideas that, you know, having had those ideas coming out of science, of careful scientific thought and observation, is an exciting breakthrough indeed.
But how does it affect our lives, Dr. Morley? Or is it just still at the theoretical level?
Yes, sure.
Yeah, I'd like to
so
chime in
there's
here.
different ways in which it impacts.
Yes, go on, Dr. Morley.
Yeah, so that there's different ways in which it impacts on mankind. So one way is that it gives us an idea about how the universe might end. It helps us to understand what physics tells us about how the universe might end. For example, one possibility is the Big Crunch, where the Big Bang would run in reverse and the whole universe would collapse and the space and time would collapse into a point. This isn't really something for us to worry about, because it would be many billions of years in the future if that were to happen, and so that's a rather an abstract impact. I think that Hawking's real impact, though, is more on inspiring people and telling us to remember to be curious, to stay curious. You know, he said that we should look up at the stars and not down at our feet, and he's reminding us to be interested in our world and our universe. And I think that we're all like that, actually, as kids, and sometimes it's easy to take it for granted that you can look up and see a sky at night full of innumerable stars, and you can wonder what each of those stars really is.
Professor Cheung, come in.
Right, so there's actually another anecdote about more immediate impact. So not directly of Hawking's theories. Those are very fundamental physics. So that's going to impact people in 100, 200 years' time. But more immediately, I think I heard the story that Wi-Fi is developed while people were looking for Hawking radiation signatures. So there you go.
That's a pretty significant breakthrough there. But, you know, Mr. Cheung, we know there's been such a huge, amount of outpouring of emotion after the passing away of Mr. Hawking. So why was he so popular in China, revered among students?
Well, it's not just revered in China. It's actually shared. The popularity is really shared globally. However, in China, people really like him because, I think we're a very nerdy population. I think people do generally enjoy STEM work, mathematics, science, and engineering. And that's going to set the foundation for further development in the economy. So I'm very optimistic about that. But also in China, there is a bit of a lack of science education on the most fundamental questions, the frontiers of science, because we have been lagging behind the West in terms of developing on the forefront of science. So that kind of information, that kind of knowledge, especially in a way that people can understand, has been very lacking. And when Hawking popped up, it was very refreshing for people as well. So people really, that left a very strong impression on people.
So, Dr. Morley, why is Hawking warning about the world of the rise of powerful artificial intelligence?
Yeah, so all science and technology can have positive and negative impacts. Often science and technology can be powerful, and that power can be used in ways that help people, or ways that cause problems for people. And artificial intelligence, if in the future it really becomes much more powerful, then it could be something which has enormous impact on our society. I mean, it does already, but at the moment, the impacts that we see at the moment from artificial intelligence are nothing compared with the potential in the future for that. I would, from talking to some artificial intelligence experts, my impression is that this sort of really dramatic, grand, powerful artificial intelligence that some people like Hawking are worried about, that seems to be very far off and not actually something that I should be worrying about in my lifetime. But you know, Hawking is somebody who thought on very big timescales, and there's no harm in thinking ahead to the problems that humanity might face in the far future, and there's no harm in, you know, deciding now to try and make sure that technology helps humanity and helps the planet and has a positive impact.
Professor Cheung, do you think his warning pours cold water on China's artificial intelligence ambitions?
No, I don't share his concern that much, to be honest. So first of all, I think he's a bit pessimistic. He was, I think from his other talks, he was seriously thinking about artificial intelligence.
The universe.
Well, more immediately the demise of mankind, and he was worried that AI might become an overlord. I think that stems from his being too smart. So basically being so intelligent. So usually the more stupid people think they're very smart because they never try to solve difficult problems. But Hawking has been trying to solve difficult problems all his life. So he's keenly aware of the limitations of human intelligence, and I think he has no doubt in mind that artificial intelligence will quickly overtake human intelligence, perhaps in the slightly further future, but whatever. So he's a bit more worried. I don't know. My definition of us and them is a little loose. So if AI thinks like us, I would rather consider them part of us. So I'm not too concerned about it.
Thank you so much to both of our guests for helping us to remember such a brilliant mind and such a richly lived life. That's Dr. Gavin Morley from the University of Warwick joining us from the UK, and Mr. Zhang Fan, Associate Professor of Astronomy at Beijing Normal University. Keep looking up at the skies. That's going to do it for this edition of The Point. You can download the app called CGTN to watch our show on your mobile, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. I'm Talaine Beijing, subbing for Liu Qi.